I wrote Localism, a philosophy of government, back in 2012. And it's more relevant now, it's more obvious that it's relevant now than it was the day the ink dried on the first copy. And what localism is, when most people think of localism, they think of, you know what, we'll have our own network here, we'll try to buy goods locally, produce goods locally, the national government can do what they do, and we'll just have our quiet little area away from them and try to stay uninvolved. And that's what most people mean by localism. And I agree with that. I think it's a good idea. The problem is they're not going to let you do that. They're not going to let you do that. They have increasingly fixed things to where all activity goes through them. And every day they're finding ways to surveil you more, regulate you more, tax you more, to hire people to tell you what to do, put more restrictions on your freedom. It used to be, yes, they could be as corrupt and absurd as they wanted to be as long as you had the right to ignore them. And that's the way we dealt with it. But they're not letting you do that anymore. They're the kind of people that are attracted to central power. They view themselves as indispensable people, but what they really are is warped people. They're a tendency towards being control freaks. And when you centralize power, when you get things in a distant capital city, and it attracts people that have that sort of mental problem, they feed on each other, and they all assure each other that overlording the rest of us is just such a great idea, even a beneficial idea, and a charitable idea. You know, they tell themselves they're doing it for the greater good, and they really believe it. It's in that little echo chamber. Meanwhile, the rest of us in the country are looking at them, it's like, we just want to get away from these people. And that's what most people think of when they think of localism. But that is not what my book is about. My book is about what would have to be done, how you should order a society so that you can keep doing that, all those good things. In other words, they're not letting us get away with it anymore. They're coming, they can't stand it that there's people who are ignoring them, and they want to make sure you can't ignore them. And so this system, the present system we're in, I think everybody who are people of understanding do understand it is unsustainable. And we don't have to do anything to make it fall apart. As a matter of fact, there's nothing we can do to hold it together. I wish it wouldn't fall apart. But the debt and the corruption and the mismanagement and the way centralized systems don't respond well to discordant feedback from reality, it's all adding up. The system's flying apart. They are undermining public virtue, because public virtue, and private virtue even, virtuous people don't need a lot of government. And these people, they don't like virtue because it frees people from having to serve them and needing them to intervene in all disputes that you have from other people. They don't want that. And so the government has been working to undermine our commitment to one another, undermining our commitment to virtue, because they want dependent people. So I saw this in 2012. I wrote a book, Localism, a Philosophy of Government, and basically I thought to myself, all right, our founders promised us. James Madison said, hey, if we adopt this Constitution, the powers aligned to the central government, allotted to the central government, are few and defined. The powers left to the states are many and indefinite. And if you vote in this Constitution, that's the kind of nation you will have. Now, was that correct? It was not correct. It was totally wrong. Each generation of Americans has wound up with a government more centralized than the one before them, no matter how they voted. Over time, the powers of the federal government became many and indefinite, and the powers of the states became few and defined. And honestly, at the time, observers had in America, when they looked at America, they said, these people have town rule. It's very much like localism. They have town rule. And the states were just sort of a layer in between the central government and the people. But they really had town rule, which is close to what I'm talking about. But there were weaknesses. The Constitution could not contain forces of centralization. There were 13 doorways through which people who wanted to centralize power operated. And over the generations, the result of working through these 13 avenues has resulted in a nation that looks absolutely nothing like the nation Americans were promised when they ratified the Constitution. And so I wrote the book and said, all right, let's look at lessons learned and what happened and what we should do to stop it from ever happening again. And that's what the book is about. It has the word philosophy in it, but honestly, it is not a book about philosophy as much as it's prescriptive. It's saying, here's where we went wrong, here's what the problem is, and we could do something like this to fix it. I wrote another book later, which was a true book of Localism Defended, which really was more like a book of philosophy, as why we should have localism as our philosophy of government. And it didn't do nearly as well because people don't, I'm a nerd, I get into all that, I'm a nerd trapped in what used to be a jock's body. I get into all that philosophy of government stuff and why things should work and why they wouldn't. Most people don't. And that's fine. So the premise of localism, the main premise of localism is finding the ways the bad guys centralize power and blocking it so they can never do that again. And the effect, the overall effect, I would say, or the gist of what is going on in localism is you bring the free market, you subject government to free market forces. Subject government to free market forces. Now, government is not subject to free market forces. When Washington makes all the rules in D.C., government is not subject to free market forces. If people in Chicago are corrupt and incompetent and bankrupt their city, but then they sell their votes to federal legislators and the president, then Chicago gets bailed out by the rest of America. See? So they don't have to change their ways. There's no accountability. Or if I don't like the way Washington is doing something, I have to leave America. That's hard. What I'm suggesting is even less federal government than what the libertarians are suggesting. Okay? Very little federal government exists to help provide a free market among the states for trade and to protect us from other large central states. And even then, I would decentralize our military much more than it is now. But I'm not going to get into these details here. My point is, if my local government makes all the rules or most of the rules, it is both easier to escape from and easier to change my local government than my state or national government. If I'm living in a city or a county and they are corrupt, they're pursuing policies I object to, I can try to change it, and you can. As an individual, you find a few other like-minded individuals, you can make a difference and unelect the people that are bothering you. Or you can you don't have to go that far. You have access to those people. You see them in the supermarket. Maybe your kids play on the same Little League team. You see them. You can talk to them and say, here's why I think that's a dumb idea. They can't get away from the people's whose boneheaded policies, whose people that are touched by their boneheaded policies. Congress can. You can't see your congressman unless you write a big check. You can't see your congressman unless you join some collective, and then that collective sees your congressman. And so you basically, the way we have the central state, it's all going to go collectivist over time, because the way you access your government is through collectives when it's a central government. But if the government decisions are made close enough to you to where you can see them, then yes, you can stop the boneheaded practices from occurring or unelect people that insist on the boneheaded practices, or simply move across an invisible line that is very nearby and keep your life. You keep your friends, you keep your family, you keep your job. You just moved 8 miles away, and now they're not the boss of you anymore. So that's what I'm suggesting. And if you do that, governments that are bad are going to lose people to govern. And they will very quickly have to correct if they're not bailed out by an all-encompassing central state that is looking to buy votes. And so that's the idea behind localism. There's a lot more to it than that. There's the 7 main pillars. The central pillar is money and banking, and it itself has 7 sections. So it adds up to 13 doorways through which things are centralized. Now, many of my friends are libertarian. I myself usually vote libertarian. Sometimes, a lot of times, it's just out of protest because the 2 parties that have destroyed America certainly don't deserve the vote of any patriotic American in my mind. I've contributed to libertarian candidates. I've worked with them in several projects, including Access, the documentary. So there's a lot for me to like about libertarianism. That said, it is a one set of rules that fits all. And I'm against a one set of rules that fits all. If men were angels, I think it would work great. But what I'm saying is, in the last chapter of my book, I take a swing at what I think are weaknesses in the libertarian philosophy. And some people are just, some of my libertarian friends just can't stand that. And so I'm warning you, if you're touchy about that, that's all right. Don't bother. Don't read it. Don't get upset. I'm not trying to upset anybody. What I'm trying to do is show that no one-size-fits-all philosophy should be placed above a philosophy that allows everybody's ideas to win, including libertarianism, where they live. In other words, let's get to the place where we're mentally healthy enough to where we don't lose sleep at night over an injustice done to a stranger that we've never met in a city that we've never been to. And right now, unfortunately, too many Americans are far from that. They're stirred up by the media, and I understand that. But that's where we need to be in order to be free. The central control is going to constantly leave 49% mad and 51% trying to control and boss the other 49%. Whereas if you go locally, you can find a locality that fits more with your personal philosophy. If you can't, maybe you need to look in the mirror. If there's no place anywhere where people, if they were allowed to mostly run their own lives, would do it like you like, nowhere on, let's say there were 1,000 different localities. They could all do things differently. You didn't like any of them. You know, maybe a little self-evaluation is in order. The problem is not always other people. But I digress. My point is, I am more convinced than ever the only political philosophy that can stop globalism is localism. Not the localism that most people think of as, well, I'll just ignore those people and do my own thing right here, because they ain't going to let you do that. You need a plan to counteract their plan. You need a vision to counteract their vision. When they float a proposal that will undermine local control and you being able to see the people who run your life, you need to realize that their proposal will do that and see how they take your liberty, and that's how you know what to oppose and what to favor. Not answering something with nothing, but answering something with, here's why that's wrong and here's what we should do instead. And so that's what the book does. And I like I said, 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I wrote this book, and I am amazed. Now we have things I talked about in that book are now happening. Counties in Colorado, counties in Oregon, they want to leave the state and form other states, either their own state or join a state where people think more like they do. Shouldn't they be able to? Should imaginary lines in the ground force people from eastern Oregon to be tied to Portland, and they have nothing in common with those people? Why should they be forced to stay together and fight with one another? They don't like each other. They don't see the world the same way. Let them go their separate ways, and let's see who can make a better world. Maybe if one does better and the other does worse, the one doing worse will say, you know what? I like their results better. Let's volunteer and go their way some. You know, but the main thing is there can be peace. We don't have to be constantly upset because people within these imaginary boundaries are imposing rules on us that we don't like all the time. So that's what localism, a philosophy of government, is about. I believe there's a link to its Amazon page in the description section of the video. If you care to, please give it a look. Thank you for listening.